The groundbreaking news that Georges St-Pierre brought to the attention of the mixed martial arts audience was finally released across a conference call involving multiple UFC fighters and multiple journalists, including Bjorn Rebney. So there's a lot to dig into when it comes to the MMAAA, right? The mama, as one of the fighters, when he was reacting to this across the Twitterverse, used the Family Guy scene with Stewie. I'm going to throw that in for you here because it is pretty funny.
Mommy! Mama! 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 Ma!
On to the serious note, and a reference that is kind of rare and one that you might not understand at first, but I'm going to come back to it at the end. Ben Mezrich's a really talented author, a New York Times best-selling author, even though everyone nowadays is a New York Times best-selling author. But in terms of storytelling, I actually think he's one of the best. He wrote a book called Ugly Americans, which I read years ago about, and as they put it here on my little cheat sheet, a true story of a young male hedge fund traders during the mid-1990s Asian stock market boom who take big risks, make big money, meet beautiful women, and don't care about ethics, right? So, Jason, why are you digging into an old book from the 90s written by Ben Mezrich? Well, one of the characters who was a head trader there, Dean Carney, had 8 rules to success when it came to trading, and the first rule hits entirely home with what I believe the Fertitta brothers knew about the MMAAA and the potential problems the UFC was going to see if the fighters did unionize or create an association. The first of these rules, never get into something you can't get out of by the closing bell. Always keep your eye on the exit point. That, I think, accurately describes the Fertitta brothers. Now, I don't want to make it seem like I am bashing the Fertitta brothers. Dana White, of course, is still very close friends with them, and even after the sale of WME-IMG, you have to give credit where credit is due. The Fertitta brothers, in addition to Dana White, grew an empire in the fight game to the point where it is going to succeed boxing not too long from now. I say that also because Kovalev vs. Ward, which was a tremendous fight, the most important boxing fight of this year, barely cracked 200,000 pay-per-view buys, whereas UFC 205 dominated that tenfold by over 1,000%. So I say the Fertitta brothers had their eye on the exit because one of the things that Bjorn Rebney said on this call about the MMAAA is that the UFC pays 8% of their total revenue to the fighters. And you compare that to the likes of Major League Baseball, which is just under 50%, to the NBA, which is about a 50-50 split, to the NFL, which is a 50-50 split. So what Rebney wants and what the UFC fighters want in this situation, the 5 that are a part of it, including Donald Cerrone, Cain Velasquez, TJ Dillashaw, Georges St-Pierre, these are big name champion fighters. Those who have say amongst their UFC counterparts and want to represent the fighters. The fighters deserve to be represented. And if it is true that 8% of the revenue, I will not take that as fact until I actually see the exact numbers, and I doubt the UFC will release those exact numbers, because the UFC responded slightly by saying that they give out more than 50% of their total revenue to fighters. I find both of these extremes to be slightly laughable. I don't think it could possibly be as low as 8%. I don't think it could possibly be as high as 50%, or there wouldn't be any reason necessarily to really start unionizing or really want an association. The reasoning, though, that makes complete sense is what happens when you're 40 years old and you don't have the privileges, or I should say, the necessary standards of employment when it comes to working, at least in the United States, and being a fighter or employed by the UFC, of health insurance, pension, retirement, your life after you step out of the octagon, and that's what this is about. There is no representation for the fighters. I think this is actually going to get uglier before it gets prettier, because I know CAA, who is a rival from the WME-IMG group, which is one of the power agencies in Hollywood and New York, that represent not just sports figures, but represent movie stars, everything like that. You guys know Ari Emanuel, based on Ari Gold, Entourage, all that stuff. So CAA is not publicly and financially backing this association, but they are somehow supporting it, probably silently in some financial aspect. So there is a lot of big over the head of what most people are probably going to see this on the surface level players in this association. Will it work is the big question. I think there's a couple of ways you can make this happen, but I want to first get into a little bit about Bjorn Rebney. He's an interesting choice for the guy who's not really at the head of the MMAAA, because Georges St. Pierre and those guys are representing the 5 board members, and Rebney was simply speaking out on behalf of them. Rebney was the guy who his contracts were so airtight when he was running Bellator that it's a little bit laughable to use the same word, that Rebney's the guy kind of speaking out on this. And even on the conference call, I love when there was the one tweet that went out saying, "Hey guys, been a while." And that was Rebney's, little icebreaker for when he started on there. Now he says that he doesn't care what the UFC says right now because they are still on the attack, the MMAAA. There's a couple other points that need to be made. In Yahoo Sports article today, Kevin Ioli made this very coherent point. Getting a quality person to negotiate isn't easy or cheap. Don Furr, the former baseball union head who now runs the NHL Players Association, reportedly makes more than $3 million a year. Major League Baseball's Players Association head Tony Clark makes more than $2 million a year. These are high salary jobs that it costs to run and negotiate on behalf of the fighters. All right, so let's go back to that first point with the Fertitta brothers and keeping your eye on the exit. Coincidence is something I don't necessarily believe in its entirety. And it is too much of a coincidence that the Fertitta brothers sold just a few months short of the MMAAA actually getting put up off the ground. This is something that there must have been rumblings about for at least a year. This isn't something that just happens out of thin air, that GSP calls Dillashaw, Velasquez, Cerrone and goes, "Hey guys, let's make groundbreaking news. Let's make a groundbreaking announcement, and let's get on the phone with a couple other guys and see who we can rally to start supporting the fighter." No, this is something that's been going on for, I would think, a year or longer, ever since Georges St. Pierre was making that alleged comeback and he couldn't get that contract with the UFC. I think that just put the icing on the cake for him to say, "Screw this. I'm going to start representing the fighters." I love how Dillashaw and Cerrone and GSP said that they're a little bit afraid right now because it is tough to stand up and speak against your employer. It is tough to stand up and speak out against the establishment in this case, which is the UFC. And if those numbers are true, if it's 8%, if it's 15% of the total revenue, even if it's 25%, it's microscopically too low. You are shafting your employees. You are shafting the product in which people are coming to buy and sell out your shows and fill up arenas around the world to watch your fighters fight. Fair is fair, 50-50 split. It's not the first time that fighters tried to unionize. It's the first time that there was enough weight behind the names. Georges St. Pierre, I'm going to say it again, Dillashaw, Cerrone, these are not small fighters. These are all champion or former or possible future champion fighters. There is one guy that they should go after, Conor McGregor. And I know what you're thinking. The UFC is not all about Conor McGregor. There's more to it. If McGregor is true to his word about wanting equity in the UFC, there is no one fighter who could bend the will of an entire organization as quickly as Conor McGregor can. And if they were to at least talk to him and create the headlines that it's happening, the momentum could push the UFC into a lose-lose situation down the road. Get Conor McGregor on your side and the UFC will bend a lot quicker than if you don't. And even if you don't get Conor McGregor and he says that he's not going to join it, let's say, and you can pull other fighters, it takes more than 5. You need to grab as many as you can. Persuade them to take this risk in standing up against the UFC. The UFC cannot survive, without a doubt, without the likes of Cerrone and Dillashaw. And if you were to add a lot to that list of people, if you were to add Wonderboy and Woodley and Cormier and John Jones and all of the headliners and Rousey and Tate, well, Tate retired, and Kat Zingano, and I could list off as many as I could possibly think up off the top of my head, and Demetrius Johnson, and Joanna Jędrzejczyk, all of these top-tier fighters, get them on your side. If you do, the UFC will have no choice but to acknowledge it. But if you don't, your union, your association will disappear into thin air, and the UFC will continue to reign supreme leader over their fighters. Comment below, like, favorite, and subscribe. A lot of different things put into this video, man. I know it's a lot of information to process, but there's a lot that happened in the past day. I look forward to bringing you a lot more information regarding the MMAAA. I find this to be fascinating. I think this is a landscape-changing move done by 5 premier fighters who deserve a lot of credit for being courageous in what they are doing and saying F the establishment. In this case, it's the UFC. I will repeat it one last time. If it's 8%, that is the most pathetic, measly corporate greed BS that I've ever seen when it comes to organizations running over their employees, and that's what would be happening. I think it's laughable, 50% my ass, said by the UFC. Not true. I don't believe either necessarily. I want to know what that middle ground is. Comment below, like, favorite, subscribe. We'll see you next time.